we truly believe that we have built a very battle-tested infrastructures, which would allow you to avoid all slashing penalties that you might incur if you are staking directly through lesser known validators. Because I believe that when you stake directly for exchanges, you don't always pick your staking providers. But even if you do, you still would have the liquidity order. And I believe that, as Adrian said, ETPs have such a requirement, such a heavy focus on liquidity, that which is where the added value will come. If you stake ETH on any crypto exchanges, I'm quite sure you would still be bound to the 10 days lockup period. However, again, our staking ETPs, you should exit at any given time.
First of all, thanks a lot for joining our analyst call. Today, we have a very special edition, also with a very special guest. Just to give you some context and background, we just kicked off our staking campaign. Staking is a very important component of the crypto asset landscape. And this analyst call is going to be revolving around staking. What is staking? How do we implement staking via our ETPs? That being said, that's why we have one of our specialists with us today. Here you see the three of us. You might know Max and myself, but today we have Baptiste on the call. Baptiste is a director and in the investment specialist team, but he's also one of the staking experts. And that's why we thought it's the perfect occasion for him to tell us more about staking, what it is, how it works, and why it's so important for investors. So thanks for joining the call, Baptiste.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for the warm intro. And indeed, very looking forward to walking you through, as Adrian said, what is staking, but also how we are executing our staking strategies and how it can benefit for investors.
Absolutely. That being said, why don't we jump right in? I think we should restart at the beginning, though. So maybe, Baptiste, in very easy terms, can you explain what is actually staking?
So to sum it up in very one sentence, the whole purpose of staking is to actually earn a passive yield while holding your digital assets. So you can look at it from two ways, I would say. From a blockchain perspective, staking is actually a consensus mechanism to ensure that all your transactions on a proof of stake blockchains, which are different from, for instance, a proof of work one, are actually verified and secured. So you can look at it from this perspective, like a way to validate all transactions. But from a financial perspective, it's actually also a way to incentivize delegators to provide their assets, to stake them, to hold them, to allocate them to some validators. So the combination of both is really about generating a passive income while you are holding cryptocurrencies.
No, that's fantastic. Is there an analogy in the traditional financial landscape?
I would say that you can look at it, for instance, as a comparison to dividends or also to interests that you earn when you are lending your money or other assets. But at the same time, I would say it's also quite unique in the way it's secured. And it's a way, and I believe it's also a beautiful illustration about how the Web3 and the DeFi can actually improve the traditional finance mechanisms. In this instance, maybe what we can first look at is how big staking is compared to the total crypto market. And then, if you allow me, I will walk you through how to actually generate income.
Sounds good.
Staking, if you compare it to the total crypto market cap, is roughly 600 billions of market cap just of proof of stake cryptocurrencies. Of course, in the non-proof of stake blockchains, you have Bitcoin as well as other proof of works one. But here, the purpose is really to focus on this 26% of the market and how much money they can generate as a passive income. So to give you an example, as of now, you have about 200 billions of assets, which is absolutely huge, and it represents 10% of the total crypto market cap. It's an industry that generates about 9 to 10 billion of rewards each and every year. And to give you a bit of perspective in terms of rates, in terms of yields, how much does it yield? If you weight that by market cap, you to say that in average, you are around 5% a year of yield. However, because all the different blockchains have their own yields, which is something we will dive in a little bit after, you also have quite a variance between these different yields. And you can have, in average, around 10% of yield if you don't weight it by market cap. Something also interesting to point out is that there is a very strong momentum with staking. Not only because we kicked off our staking campaign this month, but also because over a year, you also had already plus 3 points of market cap gained by proof of stake cryptocurrencies. And also because you have a very innovative solutions entering the market. To illustrate my purpose, for instance, ETH dominance within the proof of stake market caps is very challenging. It went from 75% to only 55% over a year. You can think about Solana as a main challenger, but also Toncoin and so on. So what we see as an ETP issuer is a very strong dynamic across many different blockchains, the underlying crypto assets, but also, I would say, an industry shift towards more and more proof of stake assets. So maybe now that we have mapped out a bit the market, we can maybe talk about, obviously, the two elephants in the room, meaning Ethereum and Solana.
Absolutely. Of course, we don't have time to dive deeper in all the different proof of stake networks, but I think it's worth looking at Ethereum and Solana, the two biggest ones, and just grasp a little bit how the staking landscape looks with those two respective networks. Max, do you want to dive in deeper a bit here?
Yes, I'd be thrilled to do. As Baptiste mentioned in the slide before, Ethereum's dominance is being challenged amongst the proof of stake crypto assets, but nevertheless, it still accounts for a massive 40% of the whole staking industry. And its market cap in terms of staked assets is $82 billion, which is huge. Interestingly enough, though, despite being the largest staked asset by market cap, the Ethereum staking ratio remains relatively low. It's only about 28% of ETH that is currently being staked. And potentially a reason for this is that Ethereum, as we know, is becoming more heavily adopted by institutions, which could explain the lower staking ratio. They may be less familiar with or less inclined towards staking compared to more crypto native users. Now, if we compare this to Solana, which is the second largest staked asset with $53 billion staked, it has a much higher staking ratio, which comes to about 68%. So it's significantly ahead of Ethereum. And as you can see, it's only behind a couple of other newer, leaner layer ones and Celestia, of course. That being said, the explanation for this could be that Solana's user base, as we know, is more retail driven. These type of users might be more familiar with staking and other kind of crypto native features. I think that gives a good breakdown of the explanation towards why we see differences in staking ratios.
And now we want to look at the APYs and compare Ethereum to Solana. But I think what would be really interesting is also, where does the yield actually coming from? How do we come to this 5% an average staking yield that we've been talking about at the beginning?
Yes, of course, gladly. So for those of you who are unaware, the total staking yield is like a pie that is made up of token issuance, but also transaction fees and MEV, which is the more crypto native way in which validators essentially order the order of transactions within a blockchain. And so these are the three kind of sources from the staking yield. And so what we're seeing actually from Ethereum is that the staking yield has dropped by 2.8% over the last 2 years to around 3.29%. And so a reason for this it could be that we are starting to see more people staking on Ethereum. In the last year, we have a 30% increase in people staking dollars staked on Ethereum. And an analogy for this is that as more people aim to take a portion of the pie, your slice of the pie gets smaller. So the more people are staking on Ethereum, the smaller each individual's yield will become. On top of this, what we're starting to see as well is that the staking yield portion from fees is actually decreasing as well, which you can see in the chart. And the reason for this is because we have started to see a rapid adoption of layer 2 solutions, which obviously reduce the cost of transacting on Ethereum, and therefore the yield generated from these fees has started to decrease.
Yeah, so it's a combination of those two things, right? Like more people want to stake. This is a reason why the staking ratio, the staking yield is going down. And at the same time, the transaction fees are actually going down because there's less activity. All the activity is moving towards layer 2s. And therefore, overall, we have been seeing an increasing staking APY for Ethereum.
Yes. And I think what's interesting to see is that for Solana, we have almost an opposite type of the story. The staking yield isn't increasing, it's remaining rather steady. But what you can see from the chart here is that the portion of staking yield coming from activity, which is from fees and from transaction fees, to be clear, and from MEV, has started to become a bigger portion of the pie. So that the reason for this is because, as we know, in the beginning of 2024, Solana had a lot of attention, which came predominantly from meme coins and social tokens. But it is part of the reason why now Solana's staking yield is also becoming more and more diversified.
Now we understand, we see the difference here between Ethereum and Solana. It also clearly shows that staking is a very attractive kind of investment strategy. But now maybe the question back to you, Baptiste, like how do we get access? What are the ways to capture, let's say, those 7.39% of Solana APY?
Yes, great question, Adrian. If we look at our very basic infrastructure, what we have designed for our clients is actually a way to get very seamless, direct, and simple exposure to the staking yield. How it works is that whenever clients invest into our ETPs, we actually match this investment one-on-one with the underlying tokens. Our ETPs are always and absolutely always 100% physically backed, which means that we actually have these digital assets in custody. And what we do with them is that we will go to see validators run by institutional staking providers, and we will allocate our assets to them. I will dive a little bit after into what it's been from a custody standpoint, but the core things to understand is that we will just allocate a portion of our staking ETPs to these validators. And these validators, they will contribute to the blockchain network. They will use the assets to validate the transactions. And in exchange, they will receive the rewards that Matt just described by the blockchain network itself. And then the validators, after taking a small commissions, will send us the biggest part of the rewards. And then these rewards will actually be paid in kind, meaning that, for instance, for Ethereum ETP, we will stake ETH, and we will receive ETH as rewards. For Solana ETP, we will stake Solana tokens, and we will receive Solana tokens. So actually, it will mean that for the same investment from our clients, the net asset value of their investment will have increased by this additional contribution of tokens. So from a client perspective, even let's assume that they just invest 1,000 USD, even if the price of Ethereum or Solana remains absolutely steady over a year, they will still capture with the ETP the performance coming from the staking yield. So we believe that this is actually a very easy and simple way through regulated products to have access to this performance without any bots to tick, without any additional constraints and so on. It's all happening with very simple products behind the scene in a very smooth operation.
So if I make a comparison to traditional finance again, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's accumulating ETFs basically that reinvest the dividends, if we take the analogy here again. So I assume it's very similar here, right?
To be even more precise, the rewards coming from the staking. And we often have the question about how does it work with the custody? Because remember, ETPs are always 100% physically backed, meaning that we can't actually we can't lose the ownership of our staked assets. But actually, it gives me the opportunity to walk you a little bit through custody and private key management. As you might be aware, the digital assets are not in a wallet or in a vault, they are actually on the blockchain. What we do is that we are just allocating these digital assets to some validators. But the private key, they still remain in our ownership. The private keys, if you want, are like your password that we stored offline that allow you to dictate where you want to transfer your assets or what do you want to do with them. But these assets, again, they stay on the blockchain. And through the use of non-custodial staking providers, it means that basically we are never giving away the custody nor the ownership of the private key to the staking providers. We are just locking our assets on the blockchain and generating the yields with it.
Absolutely. I think this is so important, Baptiste, because that's a big misconception. Of course, we always claim that we are staking out of cold storage, and that's exactly what he just described. Another misconception is people think that when we say stored or safeguarded in cold storage, that the actual coins are safeguarded. But as Baptiste perfectly described, it is actually the private keys. So the coins, for instance, Bitcoin, they always live on the blockchain. However, the custody takes care of the private keys, which are the keys and the access to those assets. I think it's really important also from an educational perspective.
I saw also a question in the Q&A about the risk of staking. You have two main risks in staking. The first one is about slashing. The second one is about liquidity. So let me dive into each risk and how actually our ETPs are designed in a way to mitigate these risks. So slashing is a penalty mechanism to punish bad behavior or negligent behaviors from the staking providers. Remember, staking is first and foremost a consensus mechanism, meaning that you rely on validators to validate each and every transaction, each and every new block. So you have a huge focus on compliance and good behavior, the people who are actually validating these blocks. So therefore, to prevent them from either being offline at a crucial moment when people actually need to generate transactions, or to try to manipulate the network, or to do some nonsense such as double signing a transaction, you are actually punished if you are not acting professionally. And this punishment is actually about burning the assets or confiscating some of the stake assets. The questions in the chat pinpointed, it's actually a quite severe punishment, which means that on our end, we are doing two things to prevent this from ever happening. The first one is that we are only working with top-tier institutional staking providers that we have very heavily due diligenced, that have excellent anti-slashing track record. And on top of this, we also diversify them. So we never solely rely on one staking provider. We have a cohort that we can rely on to make sure that we keep maintaining a perfect anti-slashing track record. But just for the avoidance of doubt, none of our staking ETPs never had any single slashing event. But on top of this, as an additional layer of protection for our customers and our investors, we also have slashing insurance policies with each of these different staking providers, meaning that even if we would, in a hypothetical world, get slashed on some of our allocations, we would still get back the accounts through these different insurance policies. But again, to reiterate, we absolutely never had any single slashing event on our staking ETPs.
I think it's also very important here that slashing is really important from a game theory point of view. That's exactly why blockchain works. Everyone in the network, it's always economically incentivized to say the truth or to act in good faith. And therefore, obviously, the slashing is basically just preventing bad actors to enter the network.
Absolutely. That being said, there is also another risk about staking, and it's all about liquidity. So as you might know, when you actually decide to make a staking allocation, when you will use your private key to sign an allocation and authorize it, you will actually have a warm-up period. It will take some days, even potentially weeks, for your coins to be actually allocated to a validator and to start earning rewards. But the other way is also true. When you decide to unallocate, to exit your staking positions, it will then again take time, which is what we call the lockup period. It can take up to 6 months for certain cryptos, but more generally, it's between, I would say, 1 and 2 weeks. However, for investors such as yourselves, we don't want to limit the liquidity of our products. So what we have designed is a very in-house and for a lot of proprietary algorithm. It's an in-house approach, very risk-adverse, data-based, with a model to actually optimize the utilization rates, which means the proportion of the ETP, which is actually its state, to offer the most liquid product for investors, which is redeemable each and every day. Meaning that, let's take, for instance, the example of Ethereum. Right now, if you decide to stake Ethereum by yourself, you will have to generally wait 10 days to exit your allocation, to unstake your assets. Whereas if you invest into, for instance, our ETH product, you will enter today. Tomorrow, you can absolutely exit your position, but you would still have benefit from the ongoing passive yield generated. So our way to manage again this is basically through several models of market forecast, order management, and so on, to ensure that you can bypass this liquidity risk and still have access, by the way, to the lowest spreads of the market.
Do you get the same yield if you do it via an ETP versus directly?
You have several variables that need to be taken into account. For instance, the staking providers, they all take their commissions. If you stake directly by yourself, you will unfortunately pay higher commissions, because we do benefit as a very large asset manager of economies of scale. So not only we will have access to several staking providers which are only assessed by us to provide the best performance, but also we will pay less commissions to them than a retail investors. We then take a variable cut out of the yield generated, and then we reinvest everything into the ETPs. And just to end up on the risk mitigation, you also have way different lockup periods chain by chain, which means that, for instance, Solana, it's currently up to 3 days to exit your positions, to unallocate staking stake assets, which means that therefore it's easier to stake a larger portion. You also have blockchains, for instance, like Tesos, where the lockup period is actually instantaneous, which means that as soon as you decide to unstake your assets, you can do it. And this is how, if you want, that we manage this whole liquidity constraints. But again, what I really want to stress out is similar to the to the slashing risk. This is something that we manage in-house to offer for the investors the safest and quickest and also easiest access to staking. We are quite aware that this is something quite new, especially for TradFi investors, and that's how I believe that we have designed a very, very seamless way to get access to both staking and the yield it generates.
Absolutely. And you're 100% right here, because obviously, especially for the ETFs, liquidity is the most important thing. And that's why we put a big emphasis that our investors are always able to create, redeem any product that they might hold. So good. So maybe to round it up, and thanks a lot for the insights so far, Baptiste, why 21 shares staking products?
Great question. I believe this is a good way to sum up a bit everything we have talked about. First and foremost, for non-staking ETPs, even for non-staking ETPs, we do believe that we offer the safest way to get exposure to cryptocurrencies. It's exactly the same thing with staking rewards. For a single regulated product, you actually have both the market price impact and the additional staking rewards. So in a bundle package, instead of having different mechanisms, different instruments to dig, we have bundled everything into a single instrument. But to go a bit further down the rabbit hole, as we discussed, you also have a multi-year expertise in staking. We know that it can be quite intimidating for new entrants in the market, and you also don't necessarily know who to choose as a staking provider in front of the myriad of potential partners. We have done the work on behalf of our investors. We have built our own infrastructure with only the best of the best providers. But again, thanks to our scale, we are getting not only the lowest commissions, but also the best yields. We have ways to capture each and every component of the staking fees to provide the best yield ever. But lastly, again, we need to talk about risk. And this is something that I believe we have truly mastered, both from a liquidity standpoint and from a slashing perspective. We truly want to protect our investors at all costs. And through this suite of staking ETPs, we believe that we have actually the safest way for you to get access to a passive revenue stream, again, between 5 and 10% a year, depending on the blockchains, and at the same time to the largest ETPs of the market. So I hope that this walkthrough into both staking and the way we execute it was useful, and we will now move to a more data-centric point.
We're basically at the end of our presentation. Again, staking is such an important topic. We know for a lot of traditional investors, it might be a new topic, but that's why it's really important to educate yourselves because it is a potential passive income stream that can be underestimated. Just to finish up here is we showed some of the graphs that Max described about the Ethereum staking landscape and the Solana landscape. And as you might know, on-chain data is very dear to our hearts. We think it's a really important component in the blockchain space. And therefore, you have a QR link in case you want to follow the staking landscape on Ethereum and Solana yourself. It's completely for free. We have over 60 different on-chain dashboards. This one we built solely and dedicated to the staking campaign that we just kicked off. And we basically can see here what we just discussed. We see the amount of staked ETH on Ethereum. We see the amount of staked SOL. We see the staking ratio, also the APY and the breakdown, and a bunch of different KPIs if you want to have a look yourself. Good. Other than that, I don't know, Max, Baptiste, do you want to add anything else before we jump into the Q&A?
Question for Baptiste, actually. I'm particularly interested in, obviously, many of our investors are not just invested in one crypto asset or in one staking venue. And we do offer mostly single asset trackers, but we also have basket solutions. And is there a benefit to doing this all via one section under one hood, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. Within staking ETP suite of products, we, as you said, have mostly single asset products. However, we also have one basket named Stake, which through its own in-depth methodology, intend to replicate the performance of several staking underlying. So each being a proof of stake token, each being stake, each generating its own yield, and therefore getting the rewards actually in the total NAV. Stake is a very great product if you want to have a combined exposure to a larger scope of assets. So to answer your questions, we do have this product available. And then I think between the question about picking this product over single assets ones, it's more about investors' preference. Because what I believe is also quite important to stress out is that staking and the yields it generates, it's really a bonus, if you want, on top of the underlying performance. Our goal here is not only to offer the staking yield in itself and to forget about the performance. It's to offer, whenever it's possible, to our investors an additional layer of performance on top of the underlying. So for an investor with an investment thesis focused, for instance, on Bitcoin and Ethereum, investing into our AIF products would allow them to not only benefit from the performance of ETH, but also from this additional layer. However, an investor with a different approach, who maybe wants a broader exposure, will themselves maybe find a better interest into our stake basket. I would say it boils down really to investors' preference.
Yeah. I think what's also very interesting around the stake, the basket product is obviously you can do the staking natively on chain for all those different networks, but it's a massive hassle. It's quite a struggle. It's quite a technical hurdle to stake on all those different POS networks. So doing an ETP in this case specifically is actually easier. And that obviously all of us being very enthusiastic and crypto native, just seeing that it's easier via an ETP structure versus doing it on chain is just like a showcase why this product structure could make sense for some investors.
Definitely.
We had another question here, and I like it a lot. It's how many % of the assets in 21 shares staking ETPs are staked?
Yeah, very great questions. So in reality, it fluctuates. It's hard to give like a fixed percentage. It will very much depend first and foremost on the lockup period. It will also depend on our own model predictions with both market forecast and our own order book assessment. And lastly, I would say it also depends on the size of the product. Historically, the larger your product is, the less is the percentage of redemptions that you can get. So we are basically mixing all these factors together into our proprietary model to get the optimal utilization rates, if you want. So not only it will depend product by product by a very heavy difference, but also it will fluctuate within one product. So it's quite hard to put an exact percentage on this.
It's from each product, the product to product is different. But as Baptiste said, we want to provide the highest possible yield. But what's more important even is the security and the risk mitigation, obviously. So liquidity, again, is the most important thing for those ETFs. And we want to ensure that we, for 100% guarantee any redemption.
Absolutely. And I would say that it's the direct benefit of our investors because this liquidity is priced actually by market makers. Meaning if you stake in this sort of risk adverse and responsive manner, you will manage to get very tight spreads. Whereas if, for instance, we would start wanting to stake way more aggressively our ETPs, our market makers could see this as a lack of inherent liquidity and therefore increase the spreads, which would penalize the investors both at the entry and at the exit of their investments.
Absolutely. Now we have more questions coming in, actually. Another one would be, your ETF always makes staking in the same coin, or you find opportunities participating, staking, and airdrops?
Yes, very good question as well. I think something critical to have in mind is that our ETPs, by definitions, replicate one underlying. So what we are able to, what we focus on is obviously rewards that are generated into the same token than the actual underlying. For instance, ETH token for ETH products, SOL tokens for Aether products. However, whenever we are able to capture airdrops in order to maximize the performance of our investors, what we try is to immediately say that market value to then get it back into the underlying nature, and therefore to contribute to the ETP performance. So we do try indeed to capture this airdrop and to bring it back, if you want, into the underlying token. What we can't do, however, is to have multiple airdrops being accumulated under a single product, because by definitions, our products are built to only replicate the performance of a single token.
All right, we have more questions here. Very engaging today. I have been staking many coins, but directly on crypto exchanges. Why should I do an extra round via 21 shares? What's the benefit?
Yes, absolutely great questions. So for this, I would like to stress out the risk mitigation on one end and then the yield on the other end. In terms of risk mitigations, what we truly believe that we have built a very battle-tested infrastructures, which would allow you to avoid all slashing penalties that you might incur if you are staking directly through lesser known validators, because I believe that when you stake directly for exchanges, you don't always pick your staking providers. But even if you do, you still would have the liquidity order. And I believe that, as Adrian said, these have such a requirement, such a heavy focus on liquidity, that which is where the added value will come. If you stake ETH on any crypto exchanges, I'm quite sure you would still be bound to the 10 days lockup period. However, again, our staking ETPs, you should exit at any given time. And when you see how volatile crypto markets are, the 10 days difference can be night and days between your overall investment performance. And I believe this is also a good opportunity to remind people about the fact that staking, while absolutely crucial and with such a momentum for the industry, is at the end of the day, only if you want an additional performance layer. Your price impact will still be extremely determining. And if you are bound to a 10-day period whenever you want to exit a position, we truly believe that this is not really in the best interest of any investor to actually suffer from such a lack of liquidity, which therefore would be another reason to pick our ETPs over an exchange. And lastly, just about the yield, we do have again multiple staking providers running allocations within within the same ETPs. We are running different allocations in parallel. And basically, it allows us to kick out underperforming staking providers as soon as the performance drops. I don't believe you have this luxury when you are doing DeFi by yourself, because you don't want to spread out too thin and to manage this by yourself. We have, I believe, mastered it in a way that it's quite scalable for us. And therefore, what we bring also to you for staking ETPs is this diversification of partners to optimize the overall performance.
Absolutely. I think that here it also comes down just the general discussion, investing via an exchange versus an exchange traded product. Obviously here, you simply buy it via a brokerage account, via a bank account. You can diversify your risk in terms of custodians, in terms of staking providers, and you're using a regulated exchange traded product. And therefore, it's obviously a very convenient and an ease of use, especially for traditional investors.
You're absolutely right, Adrian. This is also a very good point. When you are staking through a crypto exchange, you are actually adding another layer of counterparty risk. However, thanks to our setup in a regulated product with regulated exchanges, you are removing all kinds of counterparty risk.
I think that's a big one. And we've seen it in the past with big centralized exchanges going bust. Obviously, it doesn't mean it's going to happen or there's not good centralized exchanges out there, but we're clearly seeing more interest in our ETPs and ETFs because of this counterparty risk that you have investing via those centralized exchanges. Good. We have two more questions. That's a good one as well. And maybe Max, you want to give it a shot. Where do you see the SOL staking yield in 3 to 5 years?
I'm happy I got to finally answer a question. No, I'm kidding. But I think the clear thing here is, for me, overriding is that it will decrease over time. And I'll just break it down for a couple of reasons. But the first is, let's remember that staking yield comes from token issuance, transaction fees, and MEV. And firstly, from the issuance side, Solana is the way that the issuance is built is so that less tokens are issued over a long period of time. So the number issued per year decreases over time. So then, therefore, your yield coming from issuance is already decreasing. In terms of the number of users who are actively staking, we expect this to grow as more and more people get onboarded on the Solana network. So in terms of the pie itself is shrinking from token issuance decreasing, but also more people want to have a piece of that pie. I hope, and potentially we could expect, that some of this decrease in staking yield is offset by the increase in activity on Solana applications, which would increase the yield from transaction fees and MEV. But generally speaking, I do expect this to trend downwards.
Very good answer. And maybe it leads to the second question that we have here, which is, if we have issuance of tokens, does the revenue in staking increase in relation with the dilution?
So in terms of, yes, if we have you always have to refer to it back to what the current issuance is, right? So in terms of percentage, if you have an increase in issuance in terms of percentage of tokens, your staking yield will increase. Naturally, if in terms of investor dilution, it also depends on how much you are actively staking. So it's
again, like one of the components is the token issuance. So obviously you counter that here. But if you are not staking, you are being diluted by the token issuance. Absolutely. And that's Here we see a clear difference also from network to network or from blockchain to blockchain. Usually there's some networks that have up to 20% staking yield, and usually you can expect a way higher token issuance as well on these networks.
And predominantly, I think that comes with more smaller networks that are trying to engage people to join their network. And of course, as more and more people join the network and start actively staking, this yield starts decreasing and decreasing. And also the issuance, the tokenomics side of the protocol is usually built so that the issuance itself also decreases over time. They usually are not built to dilute investors over the whole period of time, but they incentivize people to join the network at the beginning.
Two more questions, maybe. Here it says, you prefer to stake flexible or hold for any period?
Yes, great question, because indeed you always have a compromise to make between reacting, for us it's with a model, but also with our own discretionary management, reacting to the more, I would say, responsive way to where the market is going, where your orders are going and so on, or at the same time, avoiding to lose performance with both the unbonding, but also the bonding period. Because just as a reminder, on both your warm-up and your lock-up periods, you are not earning any rewards. So usually, not usually, but what we have designed in-house is actually some sort of thresholds, which means that when the model suggestion is not strong enough, when the variation is too thin, we prefer to hold and to not adjust. However, whenever it's going over certain thresholds, both on the up and on the down sides, we then react and adjust that. But again, we believe that if we would, within this comfort band, unstake, then we stake, then unstake, then we stake, each and every time we would basically stay at the ceiling because of the missed performance. So we stay at the floor because of the missed performance. So in a sense, it's a compromise, and we have thresholds to define the course of action.
Awesome. Yeah, maybe let's come to the last question, which is going with that 21 shares ETP, how much of my staking reward is taking away by 21 shares?
Great question again, and indeed we take a cut to finance our whole infrastructure. We take 25% of cut. It's a public figure available on our website. We truly believe about the transparency here. We also believe that rather than capping the amount of reward of yield you can earn through our ETPs, we would rather have a 25% cut and then align the incentives to maximize the yield, which therefore means that whenever we are actually able to maximize the performance, you are equally benefiting it from us, at least proportionally to the 75% that goes into the ETP.
And I think also all of our staking years are published on the website.
Absolutely.
So you can see them, you can compare them to the native staking yield, and yeah, Baptiste.
Which is actually a very good point. And please remember that the staking yields published on our website are absolutely net, meaning that basically it's a factor of the overall yield of the network. The staking commissions taken by the staking providers are 25% cut, and the percentage of assets of the ETP that we are staking. It's not a yield that is then applied. It's truly what goes into the ETPs after all the different cuts and rates have been applied.
Perfect.
That's exactly what investors can expect, right?
Absolutely.
Awesome. I guess we answered all the questions. Yeah, thanks for listening in. Thank you very much to Baptiste for being our special guest. I think you provided a lot of insights, a lot of education. And obviously for all our listeners, in case you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to us, add us on LinkedIn, send us an email. Yeah, feel free to ask questions. We know this is a very emerging and new topic, a lot to learn, but also a lot of opportunity. And therefore, we're definitely here to support you, to provide you with educational material, or if you want to chat with us directly, we are here to help. So feel free to reach out at any point in time. And that being said, yeah, thanks again, you two, and hope to see you next time.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for the great panel, and thank you everybody for the attendance and the questions.